Thank you, Rhoda Cordry, and thank you, Terry Sharpton, and thanks to Mineral Springs for this opportunity to be included in the Historic Speakers Series. Kind of occurred to me that being in a Historic Speakers Series might involve one's age, but then I considered that other programs, clearly that wasn't the case. Thanks also to the BAC for the venue to have this Historic Speakers Series in. It's hard to think of a more appropriate place than this faithfully restored historic livery. It's really just great to have this. You know, Manitou Springs is a very special place. It's like no other that I know of in Colorado. Not that I've been everywhere, but I've been to many places in the state. And I know that coming today, it might have been a bit of a hardship for some of you, or maybe the people who aren't here, because I didn't realize when I selected this date that this is Super Bowl Sunday, and the game starts shortly after my speech is done. You should have time to get home if you're interested in that. I retired in 1996. I spent nearly 40 years in the investment business. And Debbie, my wife, and I decided to move to Colorado in order to be near to our son, who lived in Boulder and had lived there for some 10 years. And I'd just like to take a moment to introduce Debbie, my wife, and Tim, my son, because they were certainly critical members. We looked at a lot of places in Colorado, up and down the Front Range, as far west as Grand Junction and Durango, and a lot of places in between. And we were kind of looking for an older house that we could do some fix-up on. We had moved here from Boston, so we're kind of used to older buildings. And you know, there are a number of them around in Colorado, but finding them is difficult, and finding them in the right location is even more difficult. We almost ended up in a little town called Hotchkiss, which is out by Paonia. And that was a close call. We started to consider how many mountain passes there were between Boulder and Hotchkiss, and what that might entail. When we moved out here, we moved our furniture out, and we put it in storage since we didn't have any place to stay. And we moved in with Tim in Boulder, which was very generous of him. I don't know if he knew we were going to be there for 6 months, but that's what it turned out to be in any case. In our search, we finally came to Manitou. And we could feel, as we were here, that it was something special about this town, a feeling which has only been reinforced as time has gone on. We saw the house at 128 Spencer Avenue, and not without some misgivings, especially by Debbie. We purchased it, later learned that it was known as the Davis Castle No. 1, and then we learned that it was known as the Pumpkin House. And apparently even calls to City Hall complaining about the color were not unheard of. But of course, color is only temporary. As it was in this case. And we thought with some effort that we could fix this house up, but we didn't have a lot of experience. I was a banker, Tim's a lawyer. So, you know, we didn't really fully appreciate what laid ahead. A visit to City Hall and the planning department soon after we purchased it was a starting point of our historic restoration project. It was then that we began to get information about the history of the house, some of the resources available, such as old photos that were available in libraries, history centers, museums, and we learned about tax credits, which were an incentive to restoring historic properties. Especially helpful in this regard were Michelle Anthony of Manitou Springs Historic, the Planning Department, and working closely with the Historic Preservation Commission, Deborah Harrison, Gene Garrity, and Paul Eidelman, who was then at the Old Colorado City History Center. Well, let me start with some visuals about the house when we bought it, and then we're going to look at some historic photos. And then we're going to look at restoration in progress, and then the finished product, or at least finished as it is, and mostly it is finished. We've spent basically the last 7 years working on this. The most intensive period was the first 4 years. Here's the house in 1996 when we purchased it. This is the front view. The west side, the tower. And some people also have commented that maybe the spider webbing around the stones might have reminded some people of Halloween as well. At the back, you'll notice in this picture here, there's a chimney addition for this chimney here, and there's something there which is a bathtub, and you'll see more of that. This is the landscaping in the back, and the what we call the north sleeping porch here. This is the only part of the house which was not covered with cement asbestos shingles. The reason being that it was curved, and they couldn't lay them on. So every gable is different on this house. This one is a rounded one. This one, you can see a little bit of some of the earlier decorative features of this house with the scroll work there. This was the door on the west side of the tower. That's a piece of Celotex over it. And as you can see, the whole house was really this pink-orange pumpkin color. This is the interior. This is the living room and the tower room. And actually, that door that you see was sealed off, and there was no passage through there. The woodwork in this room is very plain, and we were suspicious that it wasn't the original woodwork. We weren't absolutely sure, but we later discovered that that was the case. On the second floor, they did not remove the original woodwork. This is one of the upstairs bedrooms. That's a sleeping bag. Those were our accommodations in the early going. This is the third floor. The woodwork here is a little bit plainer. Interesting to note on the door, if you can see it, the number 21, which presumably was somebody's room number, maybe for a rental of some kind. Looking at the historic photos, and these are a collection of photos that we got from Deborah Harrison, Jean Garrity, and Michelle, and some of these you may see in the book. I can't remember all of them, but right down here in the lower right-hand corner is our house under construction. It's only the north-south gable. It's not the tower, and the east-west gable had not been built at that time. Another one shows it from a different angle. Here it is, again, under construction, and not much around on that hillside at that point. This one, a little more developed. The second castle has been built. The original owner of our house, which is here, was William Davis, who owned the Soda Springs Pavilion and Jewelry Shop. He had more than one wife. This one is for his second wife. And then he built yet a third redstone castle on the other side of the valley, which you may obviously be familiar with. At that time, there was something on top of Higginbotham Flats instead of storage sheds. Here's a view from Ruxton Creek. Again, our house is back in here. A long shot again. Another one, this is, I think, Ruxton Avenue. It looks like a livery of some kind there, and here we are up here. The problem with all these shots was that they were so far away we couldn't really tell what the detail on the house was. But by chance, we were visiting at Old Colorado City History Center, and they were in the process of filing thousands of photos that they had, and this was one of them. And they said, "Oh, we think we have a photo that might be something that could be of use to you." And it turned out, in fact, to be exactly our house, which was just fantastic. Because what you'll notice on this photo is a lot of the detail that was missing on the ones that I showed you earlier. For example, the finial here, the weather vane, the cresting on the roof with the decorative endings. These are called gable aprons, which are decorative pieces that are under the eaves. Down on each, these are barge boards here. On the end of each one is like a kind of a teardrop with holes through it. There's the rounded gable. Also important are these scroll work in here and the arches on the porch, very detailed arches. So this we could use. We put this on a computer. We used a program that would allow us to blow these things up, to use math to extrapolate the dimensions, and it really made it possible for us to recreate the decorative features of this, what is really a high-style Queen Anne Victorian architecture. And we decided that after looking at these historic photos that we would make it our goal to restore the house as closely as we could to what it was in this picture, which was probably in the 1890s. And I'm not sure if this little tree that's growing here is the same maple tree that is there now, but you know, there is a pretty good-sized maple tree right there. Well, the first thing we did was to remove the asbestos siding. And to do that, since it was considered a hazardous waste, hazardous material and had to be treated according to EPA rules and regulations, we hired a firm to do that. They had monitors, they had their little suits on, they had special trucks to haul the stuff away in. And I understand my name is somewhere in a landfill east of Denver on a package that said, you know, this is his. Actually, this form of asbestos is probably one of the safest forms since it's encased in cement. And it's kind of interesting. You see they had even sealed over the windows with plastic. Even as cold a day as this was, they ran into a live wasp nest up here in this eave. Ever ready, I had a wasp blaster can. In the back, you can see as they took it off, there's some of the detail here around this window. The first thing you saw was tar paper, and then the siding began to appear. This is the west side, shingles at the top, clapboard, some decorative trim boards. The space in between here had a little different kind of cut to it. It's actually clapboard, but it kind of looks like shingles. And one of the things we noticed especially was that the window here was actually had been a full-length window. And at one time, had matched the one to the right. Floors were a very interesting area. This floor had carpet on it. It had linoleum. The linoleum squares were held down with staples and mastic, and getting it up was a lot of fun. Here I am. We call this picture the floor warrior. This room had in it carpet, linoleum, and then a layer of plywood. And the reason for the spud bar there that you see was to raise up that plywood because it had many, many nails in it, and it was most difficult to get out. It also, this particular area had asbestos in linoleum, and that went out with the siding to dispose of it. We actually had tests done on about 20 different materials, a lot of different linoleums that were in the house, a lot of insulation type materials, just to find out where the dangerous kind of things were. We ended up kind of living with these respirators on They were to filter out mainly asbestos, but also just dust and dirt, and we kind of get used to them. You could walk around, didn't even realize you had them on. This is flooring in the first floor bathroom. This has actually been a pantry at one time, and this little area here was a pass-through. The flooring in here, partly it was hard maple, partly it was southern yellow pine, but you know, it was kind of the house variety of barnyard acid that it couldn't even stand. And so we had to do some replacement of flooring in here. That little area, see, is where the toilet went. It still does. There were shag rugs protecting the floors on the first floor. Tim's dog, Callie, kind of liked them. And it was interesting. They were very useful as drop claws, actually, as we went along and did the work we needed to do. This was a major surprise. This is the floor in the dining room. We pulled up the rug, and there was about an 8-foot by 2-foot area, which was pressed board or composition board. And under that, as we lifted it up, not knowing what we'd find, that's what we found. This house is not fully excavated. That's the dirt down here. There had been a lot of moisture in the back of the house. At one point, the level outside the house had been raised above the wooden sills, and as a result, it caused a tremendous amount of damage. That's another shot of the back of the house and what was left, which wasn't much. The studs were kind of hanging free, and the sill was something that you just shoveled up. But we restored that. That floor, the inlaid floor, is actually made out of cherry and white oak. And we made the pieces and fitted them in. And I don't know if you probably can't tell from this shot, but each of these little diamonds is cherry, and it's 2 separate pieces of wood. And this is Tim assembling it after we had made the pieces. There's another shot of it. You could tell the new and the old grains don't exactly match, and that was something we just couldn't do. So when you look at it, you can see, oh, well, this has had some restoration work, which is fine, because it had. But it came out pretty well in the end, and this is the effect of an inlaid floor, which we thought was one of the great positive surprises. The negative was the hole in the floor, but, you know. Hardwood floors is something that we became more familiar with. This is the back sleeping porch area, and under that rug that was in there, a little bit of carpet, there was just plywood, so we did lay a hardwood floor. And we didn't know enough at this point to use a power-assisted hammer to lay hardwood floors. We learned. But this was kind of like being at an amusement park and trying to ring the bell with one of those big hammers, you know. And if you didn't hit it hard enough, the nail only went part way down, and then you had to start again, and the extraction process was not easy. Sanding, of course, is necessary. I got the easy job. Tim got the hard job. Now, this was another great surprise. Under the kitchen floor, the linoleum was a beautiful, hard maple floor. And unfortunately, when they laid the linoleum, they had taken a rather coarse sander and gone diagonally across all the boards. Well, hard maple is really we had to try several sanders before we could find one that would really do the job. That's how hard this wood is. But anyway, this is Tim and Debbie doing a rough up between coats of varnish on that floor. And that's applying. You learn a lot of skills on this job. I never knew that you put varnish down with lamb's wool, but there it is. Oh, electrical, that's another whole area. You know, this house was mainly wired with knob and tube. Many of you are probably familiar with knob and tube is, but it's really 2 separate wires, a hot one and a neutral. And the knobs are these little insulators, and the tubes are little ceramic tubes that go through pieces of wood in order to get the wire through. Well, almost all the house was knob and tube. But we, by the way, this is some traditional lath back here, and you can see that when they plaster the walls, it kind of runs through and goes over, and that's called keying, and that's what really holds the plaster in place. But here we are wiring up. We had an electrician who came in. He's unfortunately a pretty young guy, and he didn't have a clue what knob and tube was. He kept calling his father all the time and asking him what to do. And then we had another electrical contractor who we asked to give us a bid on some work. And they would only give us a little bit, and they kept saying, you know, when you do this, we'll give you some more. I think they were afraid to tell us how much it would cost, really, you know. Anyway, we didn't use them, and we didn't use electrical contractors at all after they put in two sub boxes, sub panels, one of which was here and one of which was in the garage. And then Tim and I did the wiring ourselves. Actually, Tim's recreational reading turned out to be the National Electrical Code. Also very helppful, by the way, in the installation of the thousands of feet of wire that we put in was the regional building inspector who really mentored us in this respect. He was very, very helpful, and we had great rapport with him, so it worked out well. We tore up a lot of floors. I don't think there's a floor in the house we haven't been under, or a wall we haven't been in back of, because when you're wiring an old house, it's not like new. You have to fish tape up through in back of through the insulation, try to get by those keyed pieces of plaster and run your wire up there. And it's not easy. You spend a lot of downtime too, that's what I call that. That's on your knees, wiring up boxes. I think we put in total, something over 100 receptacle boxes in the house. We probably ended up with more receptacles boxes in the kitchen than were in the entire house. We also did, this was a major project, putting in what's called a service entrance. This is where the electricity comes in from the street. And this is some hard work. And that's Tim wrestling with some of the heavy wire. We did not dig the trench. We had the wire buried from the pole into the house. We didn't dig that trench, but we did all the preparation for the electric company to come and connect us up. Another major thing was wallpaper removal. Most rooms had 6, 7, 8, 9 layers of wallpaper. Even the ceilings had multiple layers. The closets had multiple layers. So we had to rig up something with a steamer so we could work it. That's Tim at it. Here I am. One of the things that was revealed when we took the wallpaper off, and you could see here and here, the old woodwork, which were the head blocks for what had been the original woodwork in the house. And that confirmed our suspicion that indeed a change had been made. We assumed that that change was probably made in the late teens or early 20s. This is the dining room. This means a lot to us because the day that ceiling gave way, Tim was up there on a ladder scraping paper, and the whole thing just collapsed. And not only did it come down with plaster, it also came down, we found, with a whole lot of rodent droppings. And that was about the time that the hantavirus was really in the news. So, you know, we had our little bottles of Clorox, and we were much more conscious about using respirators and eye protection and that kind of thing. But that's one that really was unpleasant. We call this the wall warrior. This Tim. This is a kind of lath that does not key that I mentioned before, the tongue and groove. And this is in the oldest part of the house. There's no place for the plaster to go through. That's about 5/8 of an inch thick. It's really heavy duty, but it did not hold the plaster. The most damage was in those areas. Before we could replaster, we had to put on a metal lath. You can't replaster over a wooden lath, it simply won't hold, so you have to do something. I should mention that we didn't use any drywall in this project at all. We used wet plaster, the 3 coats, and we wanted to preserve the integrity, the historic integrity of the walls. It's a lot quieter. It has a different feel to it. When we removed the wallpaper, some of the walls retained the dye color of the wallpaper, in this case blue. And in order to get that blue off, we end up using a 1/4-inch drill with a scrub pad on it and going around and finally washing it off. And we did get it off, but it was another step. Oh, under the wallpaper you find all kinds of things. This is in the upstairs hall. There had been a fire here at one time, and it's amazing, as it got wet from removing the wallpaper and the steaming, it smelled like smoke. It's almost like the fire was still there. It was amazing. We guessed that it probably might have been a stove that was connected to this port in the chimney and used to heat the house before central heating was put in. On this particular central chimney, there are 2 other ports in other rooms. So that was quite a surprise when we found that. In some cases, the wall simply couldn't be saved, and we ended up making the lath, the wooden lath, to put back up. There's another example of putting up wooden lath. This is the bathroom ceiling upstairs. Obviously, a lot of problems. That one actually came down totally. This is the restoration of it. The tape that you see here is fiberglass tape, which was used to cover cracks, and then you put joint compound over that. And then, of course, all those joint compounds have to be sanded to make them smooth, because you don't get them smooth with the trowel. The kitchen, same problem with walls. Our painter had arrived by this time and kind of was showing us what he could do with doors. He loved detail. And we did have to put in some new windows. One of the things you can do to preserve old walls is to use plaster washers, and that's what these little things are. Interesting, we had to send to Boston to get those. Here's a good example of the 2 kinds of lath, the tug and groove and the traditional lath. This had actually been an exterior wall at one time. It's now an interior wall, but there had been a window there. We never would have known that if we hadn't had the occasion to have the plaster removed. And plastering, you know, it's a lost art. We couldn't find people to even come to the house and give us a bid. I mean, they'd say they'd come and they'd never show and they wouldn't call. So we learned how to plaster. And we learned how to do scratch coats and brown coats and finish coats. It's hard work. Keeping the plaster on the hawk is not as easy as it looks. If you kind of talk to somebody else and you're holding the hawk off to the side, there it is on the floor, you know. So you become a little conscious of that. We did have some great times, though. I don't remember what Tim was laughing about, but you know, when you look at the wall and back of them, you wonder if it wasn't that. This was another case of moisture and the problem that you have with moisture once it gets into the wood. In the front hall, again, the teens in the 20s, they had done some art thing. When we pulled that down, there was wallpaper under it, indicating what it had originally been. Debbie's hard at work here. You know, after you get the plaster on and you've done your sanding to smooth out any place, it has to be vacuumed so that you can apply the paint. And that means every wall, every ceiling, because basically everything ended up getting at least some plaster and some a lot. Here's just another example. This was the east wall where the house at one time had been extended a little bit to the east, and they put it up against a stone wall without adequate protection from the moisture. And so we had the same kind of problem that you saw in the dining room. When we went to wire back there wasn't anything there. So it affected the wall, the sill, and the flooring. There's a subsequent picture showing reinstalling the trim boards in that room. We originally thought we would strip the woodwork in place. Well, you got a kind of a feel for how many little grooves there are in it. This one is the plinth down at the bottom, and that's the head block. Well, we tried to strip it, and it just didn't work. So we ended up removing it. Every piece of original woodwork that we could get off, which was almost all of it, we took off. We marked where it came from exactly, what window, which side, all that kind of stuff. And then we had to record that and mark on the back in a way that would not be destroyed when it went to the strippers, where that went, some kind of a code. So when it came back, you knew where to put it. This is just in one room. And unfortunately, we were going to take this to a place in Colorado Springs to get it stripped, but just before we did that, it blew up and burned. And so we were kind of glad we hadn't been there with our woodwork. And we ended up hauling it all to Boulder to a stripper up there and had it done and then hauled it back. And in instances where the original woodwork had been removed, we made woodwork to match the original. And we did that using, this is a shaper. Here's Tim making some pieces on a shaper, which weighs a ton and a half, and it spins at about 10,000 RPM. And it's like a big router, but it's exceedingly dangerous if you're not careful. In any case, we spent a lot of time in lumber yards looking for redwood, since most of the woodwork was redwood. Some of it was fir, but most of the woodwork in the house was redwood. And so that's what we used to make up the pieces that we needed. Here he is working on another machine that we acquired. You know, we were going to have the woodwork made outside, and we kept getting a stall and a higher price and a higher price. And finally, they wanted $17,000 to make the woodwork. And we said, you know, we can do better than that, and maybe we'd get it done in some reasonable time. So that's how we ended up making it ourselves. This is a jointer, which keeps your edges straight. Now, these are the pieces that have been made and cut, fitted. One special area, which was particularly difficult, was in the tower room where the walls are curved. And so we had to end up building a steam box in order to be able to bend the wood, put it on a form, and in doing that we also cut what they call kerfs in the back, which are saw marks that don't go all the way through, which allows it to bend a little more. But that was quite a thing to deal with. Here's putting up some of the pieces that have been made in the dining room, the finished pieces. Every piece was sanded, stained, and 3 coats of varnish, which we did. Oh, I was going to point out, too, in this shot, notice the hinge. These are really neat hinges, and there were many of them in the house. They were all painted. You couldn't see them, but they came up beautifully. This is Debbie in full war outfit attacking the sanding. I think she was having a bad hair day, but I don't know. Everything had to be picked and sanded and get ready for the finish. The kitchen was a special problem. Here we are preparing the walls, the ceiling, so you could put paint on it because it was, had grease and so on that you get in kitchens. It was pretty much a disaster. There wasn't much left. You could see we put in new lath. The hanging chimney had a little port for a stove. One of the things every job led to another one. We had to replace the door jamb in the kitchen. And it was late at night. That's why it's dark out there. This was some blown-in insulation. Again, a lot of plastering required. We put up some wainscoting in the kitchen. That's Tim working on that. He made and designed and made all the kitchen cabinets in our garage. We have a lot of shots on this. I'm just going to go through them quickly, but it was a huge undertaking to do the cabinets, the counterwork, the staining, just getting it set right. I did want to point out, here is how we dealt with the countertop and the full-length window. He designed a well so that you could put, like flowers or whatever you want down there. Still have your countertop and your window at the same time. This is plastering the kitchen, and this right back here is a backer board for tile in the back of the stove. Installing the range hood, counter work. Kind of tight space in there trying to hook up that dishwasher. And we had a lot of fun with this. We went to Santa Fe and picked out our tile and basically brought it back with us and installed it. And Debbie's working on cleaning it up there some. That's what it turned out to be. I want to particularly note this work up here. This scroll work above the range hood matches exactly the scroll work which is in the gable apron on the front of the house. And that was Tim's idea to kind of tie that together. And we are enjoying the kitchen. A few fajitas, it makes life much more enjoyable to be able to have a kitchen you can cook in. Now, turning to the outside, that's Tim again. He does a lot of things. This is a boom that we rented, and he's installing the dentals, which are the little blocks of wood that had been up there, and you could tell where they'd been because you could still marks in the paint. Not as obvious as the ones that we put here under the porch, same thing, that they had been removed. Almost all the decorative features had been removed at one time. This is the back side, the outside of the house. Shows you the dining room inside, and we had some major work to do there. We did take out the fireplace for a lot of reasons. One, it didn't work. Two, it had to have a huge chimney, which you could saw was lying in the backyard. And three, it really didn't go with the period of the house. It had been an add-on, and we'll show you a picture of that later. So we put in cement sills for this area because this gets a lot of water, and put the siding on, put the clapboard on, and then for the rest of the sill on the back of the house, which was also below this concrete, we decided to dig a ditch and let it breathe, and to treat the wood that was left with an epoxy to keep it from rotting any further. And then we put the cement in, made a trough, and then at the end covered it with this grill work, which is made out of pressure-treated wood. And Tim made those up. They kind of match the grill work for the cold air returns inside the house. This is the west side. After the cement asbestos siding had been removed, there was quite a bit of work to be done in replacing the shingles and the clapboard. And we did use safety harnesses hooked up to the beams up in the attic, because those ladders get kind of tall and you're reaching to nail it and all that kind of stuff. Sometimes the wind would get the better of you, And these are the clapboards that were cut to match the ones that had been there originally. This is working on the curved gable that we talked about before. It was in pretty bad repair. We put in 14 new windows in the house. 8 of them are right here. We'd never put a window in before, but we learned, had them made to specs by CO Lumber over at Colorado Springs. And the other thing that we're coming to now is the porch. You can see one of the original posts up against the house and one of the replacement posts. It looks like this one might have been upside down, but actually there's a reason for that. And when we look at the design going forward, these are upside down, but we had asked the former owners to leave anything that was old so we could get some kind of reference point. And so these served as as a model for turning new posts that would match the old ones. And we're installing it here. Then putting in the arches was something different. Every arch was different. These strips here were laminated out of 5 pieces of redwood using epoxy glue to hold them together. And we had to have 5 different forms for the 5 different arches that were there. Our painter, as I mentioned earlier, really loved to do detail work, and well, he had his work cut out for him. I should say a word about our painter. He was from out of town. He actually specialized in painting Victorian houses. I mean, he loved to do that, and he still does. But because he was so far away, he lived in Boulder actually, and so he lived with us for about 4 months over a period of 2 years. And he really was good with colors, but when it came to changing the color tints on the TV, it was a little bit too much. This is one of the gable aprons that Tim made for the west side of the structure. This is the main one on the south side, the front of the house. Again, we were able to recreate this because of the photos that we had. Notice the scroll work in here is the same as what he put on the stove. There it is, all done. Cal's very proud of it too, you know. I mean, she helped a lot. But how to get it up was another issue. It's quite a long ways up from the road to the top gable on the front of the house. So Tim devised a scaffolding on which we could place this once we got it up there in order to secure it enough to nail it in. Oh yeah, I should point out, later in the slides is a poster of Manitou table water, one of which you may have seen in Deborah Harrison's book, because we gave one to Historic Manitou. And it was right in here, not next to this little window, kind of rolled up and stuffed into the rafters. And so that was kind of a neat find. Well, anyway, there it goes up. That's me up there waiting for it. And we hauled it up and put it in place. The roof was something we did not do ourselves. The safety hitch for these guys, the roofers, was around the top of the cone. That was kind of scary. Anyway, putting on we decided to put cedar shingles on because while they originally told us that it was going to be twice as much to do it, it wasn't anywhere near like that, and we wanted to go with the original historic shingles, and so we had these put on. But in doing the cone, they had some problems keeping the lines from sagging down, so that when you were in the back of the house, you looked at it and they didn't go level with the roof, they kind of went down. So it took several tries for them to actually get that correct. The finial we had recreated again using the photo. That's a 5-foot high finial, doesn't look it. And we had it made in Denver by people who specialize in making this kind of thing, out of copper. And here it is being put into place by the roofers. I mentioned the cresting. This is to scale to the actual replication of what was on top of the roof lines. And Tim made those in the shop there. There they are waiting to get in their proper places. And there they are being put in place. I mentioned the painter was a little eccentric. He's got his top hat today. I guess because he was at altitude or something, I don't know. But we found out he didn't really like altitude too much. This was an early start of what he could do with the door that was behind the Celotex on that west side of the tower. And not all the painting was done by the professional painter. There's Debbie at work on the garage. Now this is the upstairs bathroom, master bathroom. Basically, we had to do everything. All the new copper plumbing, all the vents. The floor kind of got destroyed. Actually, it was pretty well destroyed before we got there. But we had to put a new hardwood floor in here as well. Just a plumbing shot. I always worried about, the open flame. And that's what that little pad is. The back is as an insulation pad to keep from setting things on fire. This is the joy of putting on a new toilet. And this is the bathtub, which is really a clawfoot tub. It's called a maid's tub because it wasn't a very large one. There it is in place, and putting in the shower. And just to show you how happy we were to get that back in place, we had a couple silly shots that we were just enjoying the thought about having it there. And this is downstairs, a bathroom in progress. The hallway in progress. The front foyer had been done over in the arts and crafts style, and we wanted to bring it back to what we thought it probably had been. Tim designed these the newel post here with the rosettes to match what would have been on the original woodwork. We picked out balusters that were from a Victorian woodworking book, which were a style that were in use about the late 1800s. We didn't know exactly what had been there, but we thought this was probably pretty close. So we're almost done, except for one thing. And notice the tower has still got all the black around it, each stone. So that was another job. And we actually consulted with an expert on this to tell us what we should use for mortar. And he related the mortar composition to the stone, because you want mortar that's not as hard as, no harder or less hard than the stones actually, so that when expansion and contraction takes place, you don't break up the stones. The stone is sandstone. It's pretty soft, and we were afraid to use power tools on it for fear of damaging the stone. So we basically did every stone with this method that you see here. And then we mixed up the appropriate mortar and tinted it to match the stone. And this little line here, these are what you're probably familiar, it's called grapevining. And it's a kind of a half of a rope. And that was kind of tricky. We actually ended up using a plastic wheel that had been used for some kind of doorway on something, but it worked pretty well. This we did in the summer. It was so hot that we could only work in the morning. Not only we couldn't stand the heat, but the mortar dried out so fast it just wasn't practical. But you can see what's done down here, what's being worked on over here, and what remains to be done. Kind of interesting. We only got 2 loose stones in this whole thing, but it's a little exciting when you get one of those stones loose and you're 30 feet up in the air. So some of the high work I left to Tim. He was much better at it. I'm not good on ladders, but there was a lot of high ladder work in this one. And just wrestling those ladders is something. If you had experience trying to move a 40-foot extension ladder, you don't want to let it get away. Then we also added a fence to kind of incorporate the west side yard with the house, and Tim designed the pickets and the posts, and tied in the colors with the house colors. Sometimes we didn't know when to quit, but Callie did. This was actually, she came over and she laid down on the shovel, and she would not get up. And we gave up. It was the end of the day. We should have quit anyway. But that's dogged determination, I guess. I'm going to show you some before and after shots. This is the inside of the door on the west side of the tower. It was a pantry. Behind that wall is a door that we hadn't seen yet. And when we did see it, this is what we restored it to. It's a beautiful door. It's the original one. The hardware was on it. The glass was in it. And it was just wonderful. This doorway was also sealed off with drywall, so that this whole area had been, you couldn't circulate. There was no traffic pattern through there. Before, this is the front foyer. It's got an arts and crafts door on it, and we've talked about the newel post before. This is what it looks like today. The door, we think, is much more appropriate. We found that in an architectural salvage place in Denver. and it didn't look like that. It was, we had to change the hardware from one side to the other. It had to be stripped. But the basic design, all this stuff, was there, which was great. And another shot of the foyer as it exists today. This is a dining room. This is where all that flooring and so on was that we looked at earlier. Here it is today. I'm actually sitting there preparing slides for this talk. And Tim said, oh, I think I got a picture of you. So I was going to say, in the background here, we have right here this poster that we found up in the attic. And here it is, it's just close up so you can get an idea of what it looks like. And as I said, if you've seen Deborah's book, you've had a chance to look at that already. This was the fireplace that we removed and did a lot of wall work and floor work there. And this is that room today. We've retained the 20s style of coffered ceilings and trim boards and so on. This was the bathroom upstairs before we started to work on it. It didn't have really a shower because this wall was tilted. It was, you know, the roof. So we decided to call this the shaft, which is a combination of shower and bath. And there's the little shower and bath operating. And here it is today with the tub restored and the floor restored, new floor actually, and new cabinets. Another shot of that. This was the downstairs bathroom before we started to work on it. Here it is today. And note the pass-through has been restored. This was the, you saw this one, or similar to it, the living room and tower room on the first floor. And there it is today, same shot. At a little different angle. And the living room. And this was the third floor room. We call it the library now. The floors were very rough, a lot of linoleum on them, some kind of interesting wallpaper designs. And that's what it looks like today. This was the kitchen when we moved in. The kitchen today is similar to the shot you saw earlier. This at one time had been a closet. It had a window in it, so it made a great bathroom. And so we made basically a 3/4 bath out of that. This is the sleeping porch on the north side of the house, the back of the house. And this is the one on the east side of the house. That used to have a built-in closet covering those 4 windows in the back. And those are some of the ones that we put in, the new ones. This is the upstairs tower room. And this is the house as it was in 1996. And after the roof had been changed to the cedar shingle and the trim put back up and the finial put back up. And the windows put in here. And this is another outside shot in 1996. This is what it's like today. This was actually taken around Christmas this year with a fence and the west side and the tower. Another shot of it. And then finally, this is the prom queen, all decked out. Those are our slides. I thank you very much for your attention, and if there are any questions, I'd be more than happy to entertain them.